Jussie Smollett escapes a conviction. This is mega country. Remember that? Oh, the bond was only $10,000. That's it? What a scam deal. Smollett got the benefit of a corrupt prosecutor who was looking out for him.
He did his part of the bargain, paid the money, did the community service, the charges were dropped, and then they were brought again. And so what the court said is, this is not double jeopardy, but it really is like a breach of contract.
Jussie Smollett escapes a conviction. He has had the Supreme Court in the state of Illinois reverse what had been decided in courts before. And it's because of a situation very much like the Epstein saga, where there was a non-prosecution agreement that the defendant took that immunized him from further consequence. Now, in the Epstein case, they said that the immunity provided by the prior agreement was geographically limited, which was a joke because we know that it was not. Only to Florida, and so he was liable for all of the other misconduct in all of the other states that weren't covered by that agreement. But the same thing happened here. Smollett got a deal from a corrupt prosecutor called Foxx to make this whole thing go away. Then they charged him again, and now it's essentially an issue of double jeopardy. You can't charge somebody once there's finality a second time for something that was completed in the first instance. And so here is what this decision looks like. It's a 32-pager, a lot of reaction to this because Smollett obviously is not an honest person, in my opinion, but says here, Justice Rockford delivered this. It's an opinion from the Supreme Court there in Illinois. Says, here's what we've got. On March 2019, there was an indictment that came back against Jussie Smollett. Disorderly conduct, felony, because he falsely reported a crime. This is mega country. Remember that? 18 days later, an assistant attorney explained in open court, okay, so this is Foxx's lawyers, they were going to move to null pros the charges, meaning that they were not going to continue the prosecution of the case. The government is declining to move forward. Why? They said, Judge, on today's date, the state does have a motion after reviewing the facts and circumstances, including Smollett's volunteer service. Okay, Foxx was doing this sweetheart deal with him in the community and the agreement to forfeit his bond, give his money to the city. The state's motion to the indictment is to null pros, which is, and I think they tell us nolo prosecci, I think is the Latin phrase on it, but it means you're not going to prosecute, you're not going to move the case forward. We believe this outcome is a just disposition and appropriate resolution of the case. So he's like a deal. He volunteered, so he paid a penalty. Then he paid a fine, all of his money, probably, 6 figures. So that's it. So since he's going to forfeit that, we're not going to prosecute. That's a deal. So I do have an order directing the clerk to release the bond payable to the city of Chicago and go to our law, go to the lawyers, go to the Department of Law. Great. And there's an address and the person there who takes that on behalf of the city. Oh, the bond was only $10,000. That's it? What a scam deal. Okay, like $100K. Dude's loaded. 10 grand? That's his dinner bill. Now, the trial court granted to the state's motion to null pros, and they released him, right? They released the bond. So they say, there you go. That's the finality. On April then 5th, so a little time goes by, a retired appellate court justice filed a pro se motion to appoint a special prosecutor, raise questions about Foxx, who had recused herself, right? She was still running, the case, even though, she's recused. Yeah, right. Okay. So then someone else butts in and says, hey, we need a special prosecutor. Then another judge grants a special prosecutor. The judge reviewed this nolle prosecci and said, wow, had shocked officialdom as well as the community. He noted that Rahm Emanuel and President Trump had issued statements condemning the resolution of this case. Tooman found that negotiations had dated all the way back to offer diversion and restitution and went through and said they basically settled this thing. Then he addressed at length Foxx and her recusal. He said that once Foxx recused herself, appointment of a special prosecutor was required. And so she screwed up, right? So once she recused, her whole office should have recused, not just handed the case off to someone else who's working for her. And she didn't do that. She instead appointed her first assistant, her BFF, acting as the state's attorney. Judge Tooman found that Foxx had appointed him, but there is no office of this. So basically she appointed somebody to an office, almost like a Jack Smith scam. Tooman noted that he wasn't properly appointed, essentially, and the prosecution is void. So Tooman also cited cases where proceedings had been voided because of other unlicensed attorneys, so she appointed a Jack Smith, not even a real boy. So then the judge got rid of that guy and appointed Dan Webb as a special prosecutor. Then he did his investigation and indicted Jussie for Jussie on felony disorderly conduct, 6 counts. Now they determined, right, the Office of the Special Counsel, they investigated it. They said, well, we have to prosecute him for these reasons. And then they resolved the charges under the following circumstances. So then they gave it to another office and said he was going to do all this stuff. And they changed their view on the indictment and more. Now the defendant moved to dismiss this on double jeopardy grounds. He hired new counsel, said he'd already reached an agreement. There's a non-prosecution agreement, just like Jeffrey Epstein had. It was already executed and enforced. And Hunter was super close to having that, but he screwed that up. The defendant performed his part of the agreement. He gave them the money, satisfied the prosecutors, did his community service, right? So he upheld his end of the deal. Now, defendant further contended that public policy supports this, and the trial court heard oral argument, and accordingly, we're here. There was a jury trial. Smollett was convicted 5 counts, 30 months probation, 150 days to be served in Cook County. He appealed. He raised 13 issues. The Court of Appeals rejected a bunch of the arguments. There was a dissent that took place there. They said, in a nolle prosecution, we handle things differently. And it matches Lyle's dissent. It says the state counters that, let me back up. Smollett argues it's irrelevant that the first case was disposed of by nolle pros because there was another bilateral agreement. We bargained for a dismissal of the charges. The defendant did his part of the deal, so the government can't change the deal, even if the deal is bad. And so they say that's the framing on this. They go through a bunch of case law. You can see multiple cases. In Stupinski, on appeal in that case, the court explained how that works. In Stupinski, the court also said those things. Now, although we think it is clear from the government attorney's statement alone that the nolle pros, the contract to not prosecute, was entered as part of an agreement with the defendant, we note that the record contains even more support for this conclusion, saying there was no admission of guilt when the agreement was consummated, is what another judge said, right? So consummated, like that was done. Moreover, the Office of the Special Counsel found that there was a conflict over who negotiated the terms, and they go through the terms of the agreement. So he entered a deal, he performed on the deal, and so the state is bound by the agreement. And even though Jussie for Jussie is really something of a defendant, that's how it works. And you don't want this to be different because then the government can just come and change the deal after you've entered the deal. This is why we were screaming and laughing at Hunter Biden not in entering that deal. He should have just entered it because this would have been his argument. I'm done. I already performed. And Jussie's lawyers made it happen. We're aware that this case has generated significant public interest and that many people were dissatisfied with the resolution of the original case, and they believe it to be unjust. Nevertheless, what would be more unjust than the resolution of any one criminal case would be holding from this court that the state was not bound to honor their agreements. Yeah, that's right. Government has to honor them. As the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania recently stated, it cannot be gainsaid that society holds a strong interest in the prosecution of crimes. It is also true that no such interest can ever eclipse the constitutional rights of the people. That's right. We want bad people. We made this point earlier this week, and some people might disagree with this, but you'd rather have 1,000 guilty men go free than one innocent man be imprisoned. So the constitutional rights of forcing our corrupt government to honor their deal is more important than Jussie getting prosecuted in this case. Now, there should be consequences. Kim Foxx and the people who gave him the corrupt deal at the outset should all maybe be investigated for abuse of office and other public corruption charges based on how they communicated and what they were doing to rig this on the back end. I'm sure there's charges there, but they'll never be found liable because it's Chicago. But the court further noted the consequences of failing to enforce this would be a problem, and so we reversed the judgment and it is remanded. And of course, I think it's the right legal outcome, but Smollett got the benefit of a corrupt prosecutor who was looking out for him because he was on the right side of the aisle. He was making up claims against MAGA to try to smear an entire group of people across America for political purposes, and he'll essentially get away with it. Now, he went to jail and he's not going to get that time back, but maybe he'll file a claim against the city of Chicago and get paid. We'll continue to keep our eye on it. But here is another report from this local news entity on Fox, and they brought in this defense attorney to get her take on this. Is Jussie innocent? No, obviously. He just had a real smoking deal from a corrupt prosecutor, kind of like Epstein did, and his worked.
Exactly.
The court is saying that there was a non-prosecution agreement reached between the state's attorney and Smollett, and that required him to do community service to pay $10,000. He did his part of the bargain, paid the money to the community service, the charges were dropped, and then they were brought again. And so what the court said is, this is not double jeopardy, but it really is like a breach of contract, and it really is not good for the public trust, because you have to trust the prosecutor if he or she is going to make a deal with you.
Yeah.
And if you meet your part of the bargain to your detriment, then the deal should be upheld. And it was improper to have another prosecutor come in and prosecute him.
Okay, so
That's right. So Jussie is going to escape liability here because he had a prosecutor at his back. But the people know the truth of what happened here. The guy, in our opinion, lied to America to smear an entire political party. People will not forget that.